If you spent any time around a millennial lately, you may have heard a strange phrase coming from their lips, something to the effect that they're adulting today, or even adulting too hard today. To find out what that means and with some tips on how to prepare millennials for adulting, Jonathan Pokluda joins me. Thanks so much for joining me.
Hey, Cheryl, thanks for having me. We're adulting like a boss right now.
Right?
Just hanging out.
This is the most adulting I've done all day.
Look at us adulting.
We're using it in a sentence. Okay, for people who are kind of like, what does that mean? Tell me what adulting means.
Growing up. It's just it is the threshold by which we pass through from, being under the control and reign of our parents, you go to college, the freedom that's there where a lot of people kind of lose themselves. And then out of college, you get to this place where it's like, oh man, I've got to find a job and a place to live and something to do and my own laundry, those kinds of things. Those are adulting things.
Okay, so all of us have had to adult at some time in our life, and every generation does.
Yeah.
Is it just me, or does it seem like this generation is finding it more challenging than others, or do they just talk about it more?
Well, you talk about delayed adolescence, and so I do think people are growing up slower and later in life. Marriages are happening later. The statistics would tell us that that's true, but I also think that there are things that have gone into that. We talk about just like everybody got an honorable mention, for example. Everybody got a ribbon. Everybody got a trophy, just for showing up, participation awards. And so some of that has gone into what you think of as delayed adolescence. So I do think it's a bigger challenge. It's a bigger struggle. Also, the kind of boom of technology and just the way that the world has changed so fast, I think that's created it. It's created some discomfort for those growing up.
Yeah, I remember my dad telling me, you turn 18, you're either in school or you find a job and pay rent, or you're on your own.
Yeah.
Like you're out of the house.
Yeah.
That was my expectation. So I think probably this generation hasn't had it quite as maybe strict as our parents were.
You think about my grandfather, when he turned 18, he was fighting a war. And when my son turns 18, he'll be playing a video game. And so there's just there is a difference between generations, but we all have to grow up and we all have to get to the same destination of adulthood. And so I hope this book helps people do that.
Yeah, so you've written this book, Welcome to Adulting, and I know it's all about equipping them. Such great advice in here, like things that are so practical and everyday that maybe we even take for granted, but you explain it so well and prepare them. What are you hoping this book will accomplish for millennials?
Yeah, so for the past decade, I've led a ministry targeting millennials. So tens of thousands of millennials have come through. And I realized that so much of ministry is just pattern recognition. It's like them doing particular tasks and getting the same results. Some of those results are good. For example, dating and getting in a healthy marriage, or dating and dating and dating and continuing to bump their heads against some of the same obstacles in life. And so as I wrote down those patterns, what worked, what didn't, what led to success, what didn't, and applied the scriptures, the Bible, I began to see just really clear, helpful advice that I started writing down. The book was born. What I've been encouraged, Cheryl, is how many grandparents have reached out to me, how many parents. Every week I get emails from dozens of parents and grandparents saying, hey, this is something that I read that actually helped me understand my kids. They helped me relate to my grandkids, or something that I gave to them, for Christmas or their birthday. So that's been fun to watch the gaps between generations be bridged.
Well, it's so good because every older generation, as long as I can ever remember, kind of rolls their eyes, pink hair or their music or whatever it is, right? Yeah. And we really don't want to engage in that. We want to find ways to equip and empower them. So what are some ways that, as that next generation parents, grandparents, whatever you are, mentor, how do you equip and empower? How do you suggest we do that?
Yeah, I think we all have, let me just back up for a minute and say, I think we all have what I call the older brother syndrome. And so when you think about the prodigal son, the one kind of leaves the father's house, and he goes and sows his wild oats, and he comes back, and then the dad runs out and throws his arms around him, and he experiences the grace of God, that he wants him there. But then what happens is, as he stays with the father, he grows into the older brother. He becomes hard-hearted. He becomes, looking down on others. And I think every generation that has lived has looked back on past generations like, oh, they're lazy, they're narcissistic, they don't want to get a job. I can't relate to them. And we forget that the generation before us took some time and patience to sit with us and talk to us. And so what I would tell your listeners is they want to hear from you. They want to meet with you. They want you to pour into them. Get past that hard surface where they're kind of pushing you away. They want a relationship with you, and they know that you've gone before them, and they know that you have wisdom to offer them. And so continue to try, continue to lean in, continue to ask open-ended questions, and just know that they really want that deep down inside.
I think that's true of every generation. This generation, you talk about job hopping
Yeah.
in the book, that they job hop more than anyone else. And you say the reason for that is their expectations, what they've been told to expect out of life. Tell me about that.
So I think your greatest disappointments, your greatest discouragements in life come from your expectations. And so when millennials were surveyed, their number one and number two goals, they wanted to be rich, they wanted to be famous. And so they're trying to do that. They get in a job hoping that it's going to lead to riches, and when they realize that they actually have to work, they jump into something else. What I think's happening, Cheryl, is they're looking for happiness. They've been told, hey, follow your passions. The problem with following your passions is your passions always change. Your passions lead you in and out of relationships. Your passions lead you in and out of jobs. Your passions lead you in and out of colleges. And so we have to follow something other than our passions. A commitment has to come in and mark our lives. We have to say, hey, I'm going to do this, and I'm going to keep doing it even when it gets hard, even when I don't feel like it. I'm going to continue to, and that's where excellence really comes from. That's how we get great at something.
We all have to do that.
Yeah, that'll preach.
And also you make a point in the book, which I really thought was powerful, that we're more worried just as a culture than ever before. We deal more with depression and anxiety, but this generation out of all of us is the most worried.
That's right.
So what's going on with millennials that they're feeling that kind of stress? Because on one hand, we're like, oh, they're so carefree, they're changing jobs, they don't really commit, they don't want to work.
Yeah.
At the same time, they're so anxious and worried.
Yeah, think about all the questions that you've asked, which have been fantastic. They all really tie together back to this expectations reality. And so if we haven't dealt with hardship when we get into life and we experience the realness and the challenges of life, depression's going to come in, right? Because it's like, oh, I didn't know it was going to be this way. I'm bumping my head against the challenges of life, and I just got laid off, or my job, it doesn't fulfill me. And so then despair and depression comes in. But I think if we go into it like, hey, my job wasn't meant to fulfill me. Hey, it's going to be hard, and we change our expectations. Along with that, I would say with the boom of social media, where everyone has 6,000 friends, but they're not really known by anyone, and I'm comparing myself to others on a regular basis. The comparison is the thief of joy. That also, I think, has led to the highest levels of depression that we've ever seen. And so really what it is it's a lack of purpose, a lack of meaning. It's a lack of an understanding that you were created by God, for God, that He desires a relationship with you, that He loves you so much that He sent His only Son, Jesus Christ, so that you wouldn't have to pay for your sins. He paid for your sins. And I think as millennials, young adults are awakened to that reality, they begin to find a purpose. They begin to understand why Creator God placed them in the human experience so that they can know Him and to make Him known. And when they find that purpose, a lot of times what I've seen is the entitlement dissipates, the despair goes away, the depression subsides, and they begin to grow.
That's such a good word. You lead an organization called The Porch.
That's right.
You talk to thousands of young people every single week.
Yeah.
Are you seeing hope for them? Because we've talked about the challenges, but you must be seeing some incredible things happen.
Yeah, when I think about the future of the church, I'm incredibly hopeful. And the church has to reach the future of the church, because if you're not reaching the future of your church has no future, know. And so we have to focus on the next generation and how to pour into them and really unleash them. And when I look at them, when I see them, when the gospel grabs them, when they understand why they were created, they find their purpose, I see a shift in them being awakened to something and wanting to live their lives for something bigger than themselves. And so I'm incredibly hopeful.
And they're one of the generations that cares the most about social justice and suffering in the world. So how do you see that play out in their lives?
Well, yeah, they want to work for a company that cares about making the world a better place. They're very social justice minded. They want to recycle. They care about global warming and these kinds of things. Those are hot topics for them. And I think when you take those desires and you say the reason that you should care about that is because we're redeemers, we're ambassadors, we're representatives of another kingdom that is God's kingdom. When they're awakened to that, they begin to see the world through that lens. I call it a biblical worldview. And it's like you're seeing for the first time. And now all of a sudden their job is not just a means to make themselves rich. Their job is a way to make God famous. Their job is a way to love people. Their job is a means to travel and to go to other places and represent the kingdom that they belong to. And when I say the kingdom that they belong to, I just mean this narrative that there is a God, that there really is a creator, and He's created us to know Him and to be in relationship with Him. And when we begin to realize that, when our hearts are awakened to that, we begin to find our purpose for the first time. And that's what I'm seeing in millennials and young adults.
Such a good thought, you know, and I think that is true not just of young people, but every single person. We all need to know that we are here for a purpose, that our lives can make a difference, that we can change the world. Thank you so much for coming and sharing. We just barely touched the surface of this. You're going to have to get Jonathan Pokluda's book, Welcome to Adulting.
Thank you so much, friend. Thanks for having me.
We'll be right back.